Okay, now we're going to look at strategies for rebutting your opponent's contentions. And this is very, very important because, again, your opponent's contentions, those are his main arguments for his side. You definitely need to attack his main arguments in order to win the round. So you need to attack those contentions. So in this video, we're going to look at how you can attack those contentions, various methods and strategies you can use. And the first way is to look for logical fallacies. What is a logical fallacy? A logical fallacy basically means there's an illogical flow in your opponent's argument. Something doesn't quite add up logically. Logical fallacies, we're going to go over just a few of them. We're going to go over 4 of them, but there are really several. So we're going to look at some logical fallacies. I have some examples of logical fallacies that I'm going to give. I got those from a website called logicallyfallacious.com, it's a whole database of a ton of logical fallacies. So the first logical fallacy I want to go over in this video is the logical fallacy of emotional appeal. And what this is basically just trying to win the round just by making people feel bad, but you're only using emotion, not logic. So you're trying to win the argument based on emotion instead of logic. And this is a logical fallacy because it doesn't always play out logically. So for example, say that someone says, power lines cause cancer. I met a little boy with cancer who lived just 20 miles from a power line who looked into my eyes and said in his weak voice, please do whatever you can so that other kids won't have to go through what I'm going through. I urge you to vote for this bill to tear down all power lines and replace them with monkeys on treadmills. If you listen to what I just said, there's no evidence to back up my claim that power lines cause cancer. I didn't present any evidence. I didn't present any logic of how this works. I didn't present any statistics saying that power lines do cause cancer. I just gave this emotional story. And it made you feel bad for the boy, yes, but I didn't prove anything. I didn't prove my claim. I didn't prove that power lines cause cancer. My argument isn't valid. Not only that, but it's also ridiculous. There's no evidence, only emotion. So it's okay to have emotion, but if your opponent has only emotion and there's no logic undergirding that, that's a problem. And you say, this is a logical fallacy of emotional appeal. This is only emotion. There's no logic, and this is not a valid argument. Okay, so if he uses that in his contentions. And by the way, these logical fallacies are mainly for the contentions because that's mainly when they'll come in handy. But if you find a way to use them outside the contentions, maybe in the introduction and the value and whatever, absolutely use them wherever you want. It's just I'm putting them in the contention video because usually you end up using them in the contentions. All right, second logical fallacy, the red herring logical fallacy. And red herring basically means it's a distraction from the issue at hand. So let's look at this example where there's 2 guys named Mike and Ken, all right? And Ken has just cheated on his math test, so he's done something bad. And Mike confronts Ken and says, Ken, it's morally wrong to cheat on your math test. Why on earth would you have done that? And Ken says, instead of answering, Ken says, but what is morality exactly? What is morality? And Mike says, well, it's a code of conduct shared by cultures. And Ken says, yes, okay, but who creates this code? And they go on this long discussion. Notice here, Ken distracted from the issue of cheating on his test by beginning a talk about morals. So he shifted the conversation, he changed the subject, and now it's going somewhere else, and he's avoiding this issue. He never answered the question of why he cheated on his test. He's avoiding the issue by just talking about something else. And this is a logical fallacy of the red herring, because it's a red herring, like this little red thing that distracts everyone, like everyone looks at that instead of the main issue, and it's a distraction. And that's a logical fallacy because you're avoiding the argument. You're not answering the question. You're not answering the argument. Logical fallacy. Circularity, circular reasoning. Again, I went over this in the video about values. If you have a circular argument, that's invalid. I can't tell you that you should eat Oreo cookies because you should eat Oreo cookies. That doesn't mean anything. I have to give you another reason. My reason for why you eat Oreo cookies can't be that Oreo cookies, you should eat them. Instead, I have to give you another reason, like you should eat Oreo cookies because they taste good, or because they smell good, but not because of Oreo cookies. You should eat Oreo cookies because you should eat them. That's circular. That just goes around in a circle. Sometimes circular reasoning can also be there's 3 things in a circle, which I guess is a triangle, like you should do A because of B, you should do B because of C, and C because of A, or something like that. It's still a circle. It's just a bigger circle. That's still circular reasoning. Yeah. All right, strawman logical fallacies. This is a common logical fallacy, actually. Strawman is basically where you exaggerate your opponent's argument and make it weaker, or I guess your opponent will be doing this. Your opponent exaggerates your argument to make it look weaker or more ridiculous than it really is, and then he attacks the weaker argument. Okay, so he takes your argument, it's a good argument, he weakens it, he attacks the weaker one, the one that he just weakened, and then he says, oh, see how I just defeated that? That means I win. And that's a logical fallacy because you're making your argument, he's making your argument weaker or more ridiculous than it actually is. So for example, according to logicallyfelicious.com, this is the example they have. Senator Smith says that the nation should not add to the defense budget. Okay? Senator Jones says that he cannot believe that Senator Smith wants to leave the nation defenseless. Senator Jones just committed the logical fallacy of the straw man. Senator Smith didn't say he wanted to leave the nation defenseless. He just said we shouldn't add to the defense budget. But Senator Jones took that we should not add to the defense budget, made that weaker by saying, oh, Senator Smith is saying he wants to leave the nation defenseless. And then so Senator Jones took the original argument, exaggerated it, simplified it into something stupid, then attacked the stupid argument. But that stupid argument is not the argument that was made. Senator Jones is not actually responding to Senator Smith's argument. He's committing a logical fallacy and he's being unfair and dishonest. And that's why this is called a straw man. It's sort of like, you take the argument and then, you kind of make it into this straw man, like a scarecrow or something, I guess. And then you kick the straw man and he falls down. But the straw man, is just a semblance of the real man or the real argument. You can sort of get the idea from the name. It's a straw man argument because you're taking the argument and you're making it weaker into like a straw man, and then you kick the straw man, I guess. Anyway, so there are some examples. These are just 4 logical fallacies. I can't go over all of them because I don't have time, but there are several more logical fallacies. I put a photo on the Facebook page. It has a chart of logical fallacies according to robots, and they have a ton of logical fallacies there. Study those, really simple to understand. I have a video about the slippery slope logical fallacy, which I really recommend you watch. It's very, very hilarious. And the slippery slope logical fallacy, I'll just go over that really quickly, is basically where you say, if you do this, then this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and then something ridiculous is going to happen. So like saying, if you don't do your homework today, then you're not going to do well on your test. If you don't do well on your test, you're not going to get into a good college. If you don't get into a good college, you're not going to get a good job. If you don't get a good job, you're not going to get married. If you don't get married, you're going to be lonely, and if you're lonely, you're going to end up, homeless in New York City or something because you didn't get a job. Something like that. But the fact that you didn't study for one test doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up homeless later, right? So that's the logical fallacy of the slippery slope, saying that if this happens, all these other things are going to happen, and then this ridiculous thing is going to happen. Anyway, more on that in a video which I have. So definitely recommend you watch that and read those resources. So those are logical fallacies. You can attack your opponent's contentions using logical fallacies, but that's not the only way to attack your opponent's contentions. The second way, you can argue that your contentions are more reasonable or necessary. The judges should be voting based on the resolutions. They're going to think about which debater showed me better, which debater better convinced me, the AF or the neg. So just show that your contentions are more reasonable and more necessary and just better than your opponent's contentions. The third thing you can do, you can say your opponent's contentions, they don't support his argument or position, or they don't prove anything worthwhile, right? The contentions are supposed to be arguments that are supporting your opponent's arguments and supporting his positions. If they're not doing that, if the contentions don't support the argument or don't support the position or don't say anything at all, then they're useless. And so you can say these contentions aren't doing anything. They're not supporting his argument. We can just throw them out because they're not doing anything. They're not supporting his position. Sometimes the contentions could even work against your opponent's arguments. You could say, Judge, my opponent's own argument works against his position. And that's very, very effective because then you're making your opponent look like a total, his main argument is actually working against him. And that's a very effective way to both destroy his credibility and increase yours and increase your persuasiveness. All right, the fourth thing we can look at is gaps in logic. And this is very important. Now, when I say gaps in logic, that sounds very vague, but more specifically, gaps in links, missing links. So you have the value, right? Your opponent has a value. At bare minimum, your opponent needs to show that his value is the highest value and that his side leads to his value, because that's how LD works. He has to say, this is the highest value, my side leads to this highest value, my side is the highest side. That's what he has to do to win. If he doesn't do that in his contentions or elsewhere, if he doesn't show that his value is the highest value, or he doesn't prove that his side leads to his value, that's a serious gap in logic. And if you can prove one of those things, his entire case falls apart and crumbles. Because if he does not do those two things, there is no logical reason for the judge to vote for him. There's no reason to win. If he doesn't prove his value is the highest value, then it's like, okay, free trade leads to this value. Who cares? That's not the highest value. Throw that out the window. If he doesn't show that his side leads to this value, it's like, okay, this is the highest value. That's cool, but your side doesn't get there, so we still shouldn't vote for you. Throw it out the window. So you need both of those things. If he doesn't do those two things in his contentions or in his case, you normally would be in his contentions, point it out and you can utterly destroy his case because there's no logical reason to vote for him if he does not do those two things. That's very, very important. So look for gaps in logic where he doesn't prove those two things. And again, as we talked about in the previous point, also look and see if there's something in his contentions that actually shows the opposite. So like if he's arguing that his side leads to your value, but his contention actually shows that your side leads to his value, point that out, because that means you should win. If your side leads to his value, you should win, according to the logic of LD. So just look for these gaps in logic and these contradictions and these missing arguments. Look for these missing arguments and look for ways that you can break the links and defeat your opponent at his own game even sometimes. So that's how to defeat your opponent's contentions. We're going to look at this a little more in depth in the next video. We're going to look at defeating your opponent's examples, which are usually in the contentions, and we'll look at how to do that. So I'll see you in the next video.